Now,
Cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a special edition of the High Energy Seminar. October is National Disability Awareness Month. Actually, I'm not sure if it's national or international. Kim, you should
I
correct
think
me.
it's national, but
National Disability and Disability Employment Awareness Month. And in honor of that, we are going to hear about all the ways Chandra's data has been made accessible. So our speaker today is our very own Dr. Kimberly Arcand. She is an expert in astronomy visualization and has been a pioneer in 3D printing and extended reality applications in this field, and most recently, data sonification as well. So we're in for a treat today. Kim began her career in molecular biology and public health before moving to Chandra in 1998. So she's been here a while, and many of you probably know her. In addition to being an award-winning producer and director, she is an expert in studying the perception and comprehension of high-energy data visualization across the novice to expert spectrum. Kim has co-written 7 popular science books, including her first 2 children's books that came out last year, including Goodnight Exome, which is super cute, and I'm thinking of getting it for my nephew, so you guys should check it out. Kim, please take it away.
thank you, Rutu. Okay, I have a lot of stuff to show. Hopefully you can see my screen okay.
Yes, and sorry, I forgot to mention, Kim loves taking questions during her talk, so if you see something that you have a question about, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll just ask it then
Yeah,
instead of at the end.
I would love a conversation. I really would. So, all right. So I think here in high energy, we're very, very lucky to have, or fortunate to have, based on the work of lots of people, a huge sandbox of data to be able to work with or play in, as I like to say. And for most of my career, at least at the beginning, a lot of the emphasis was put on figuring out how to process gender data to make it obviously scientifically correct, but also aesthetically pleasing, and to be able to like squeeze all of the lemon juice out of those lemons. And I mean in the best way, because I love lemons, in order to make the lemonade, the lemon tart, whatever, whatever lemon food you're interested in, because it's lunchtime and I am a bit hungry. So again, a lot of our work in those first 10, 12 years, I think, was really focused on how do we process this data in the best way possible to really emphasize the incredible detail that is available in gender images, and to really make sure that scientific story shines. So I'm going to just kind of cycle through some of my favorite images over the past decade or more, to kind of get across that point of how much work it has taken to take all of that information and translate it into this visual form. And I'm excessively proud of the work my team has done in working with scientists around the CXC, around the CFA, and around the world, really, to be able to create these scientific images and to really showcase all of the sciencey goodness that's wrapped up inside of those data. But as I was nearing about year 10, I would say, of my career, maybe a little farther in than that, I started just kind of wondering what more we could be doing. I think especially as, someone, as many of us are here, that's funded by the government, I really do feel strongly about that moral or ethical obligation to be able to share all of the exciting science from Chandra in a way that everyone can enjoy in some form. And not everybody can enjoy the visuals. So it's been really important to me and my group at large to be able to consider how can we process Chandra data to help make it more accessible. I think there's a really unique opportunity with Chandra as a mission that studies that X-ray universe, because no human is naturally going to be able to see X-ray data. So yes, we can prioritize the visuals, but we can also prioritize additional ways of knowing, of learning, of making meaning. And that's what I'm hopefully going to take you all on a journey for today. So starting with my very favorite image in the entire universe, which, yes, I know is somewhat ridiculous to say, but Cassiopeia A has always been near and dear to my heart. It was one of the very first data sets that I ever worked on. And I remember how excited I was and how excited the folks around me were when this image was first processed back in August of 1999. And it was really exciting and really critical to see how sharp and beautiful this supernova remnant was. So this was the very first light of Chandra, of course, but now, a couple decades later, we have such a fantastic archives here that we get to look at Cassiopeia A over and over again and process all of that data and really make a very exciting image to look at as well. Again, now from going from that first hour of observation from first light to over 1 million seconds of data in this image that's broken apart by chemical emission. So these images, I think, are very special, but it was in about 2008 that Tracy Delaney, who was at MIT at the time, approached my group to be able to work on a result for Cassiopeia A in 3D. And I was really excited about this because at the same time, as many of you might know, Alyssa Goodman's group was working on astronomical medicine, the 3D software that was allowing her group to do some work with molecular clouds in 3D. And we thought this would be a really perfect pairing. Tracy's kind of unique view of things and that data paired with Alyssa's software to be able to create this first 3D representation of Cassiopeia A. And it was just an awful lot of fun to work on, honestly. Being able to help Tracy visualize her data using this 3D software was very unique at the time. And really, I think, set me down a path of thinking like, okay, well, we obviously will continue to do the two-dimensional images. That is sort of our bread and butter, so to speak. But what else can we do with our data? And that definitely started us on a path of learning. We've sort of translated that original Cassiopeia A data set into many different forms since. We're looking now at a 3D model that was essentially taking the architecture of the 3D data from Trace's model and then bringing it into professional animation software so that we could texturize it and light it in a way that looked perhaps a little less brain-like. Because that astronomical medicine software is, as some of you might know, just an adaptation from Boston area medical departments that were doing brain imaging at the time. So to get it to look a little bit more typical, perhaps for a non-expert audience, it was really useful to be able to bring that architecture into another 3D platform to be able to update the textures in a different way. But I was really interested at the time in 3D printing. And I'll tell you why. It's actually because of some colleagues at the Smithsonian. They had just at the time 3D scanned and then 3D printed President Obama's head. And I remember watching them do that work and just I was fascinated by it. And so I thought, well, if they can 3D print our president's head, I think, we could do the same with this Cassiopeia A data. But it was very experimental. It took a lot of, fits and starts. My team was super determined to make it work. And so after quite a bit of trial and error, you see the result that April will be pulling out of one of our early printers, the MakerBot. And what's interesting about that type of adaptation is it's definitely not a straight process of 3D model to 3D print done. There definitely needs to be additional processing done on that three-dimensional data set before you can 3D print it, because there are going to be different areas of the data that are not attached to anything. And so in a 3D print, they'll just fall to the ground. So you do have to do some selection and refinement of the model in order to get it to work in a 3D print machine. And that's what we did. We did a lot of testing of this model to be able to do this first version. It's still a very tricky model to this day. It has a lot of texture to it, a lot of complexity to it. So it takes a long time to print, but also because the jets are so thin, it tends to be a little bit delicate. So no matter how many times we've reinforced those jets, they've always proven to be a little tricky. But I was really, really happy with the results. It was kind of a moment of play at the time. I really did not know exactly what we would be able to do with this, but I had a hunch it would be useful. And I think having that ability to sort of pursue that in a mode of curiosity was really useful. Because from there, we iterated with it quite a few times and ended up figuring out how to do full color 3D prints. We tried many different kinds of 3D printing, from powder printing to the PLA printing. Lots of experimenting had to happen before we got to some versions that actually seemed like they would be useful. And then when we started showing people, the reaction was very, very positive. We showed senators, we showed students, we showed lifelong learners, all different kinds of people were interested in this type of product, because I think for them particularly, it might not always be easy to find a connection to the high energy universe when you're talking about really high energy processes, really incredibly sized scale phenomena. These types of things are not always the most simple to process. And so having an exploded star that you could hold in your hand just proved to be a very um, touchable and teachable moment. So that was kind of the start of a journey in 3D printing. Once we had figured out how to do this with Cassiopeia a few other models followed. And from there, we actually established a program of being able to produce 3D printed kits of different kinds of objects across the stellar evolution path that we actually took to the National Federation of the Blind, to their summer youth slam program, and worked with students like upper high school, early college age students, to be able to work with them to really make sure these 3D prints, these models that they could hold, um, were acceptable, were useful, were enjoyable, were, relatively strong enough to handle a very heavy tactile experience, etc. And then from there, we moved from that original pilot program to a series of programs that we did with UNESCO, with IAU, with a bunch of the NASA centers and other groups of blind or visually impaired students or learners around the US and around the world. And what we got out of that collaboration was really exciting for me. We got a number of very usable recommendations that improved all of the work that we were doing in this 3D printed space. And yes, on cue, there goes my cat. Everybody say hello to my space cat, Midnight. Every time I sit in this chair, he comes over to say hi. So I have not done a 3D printed cat yet, but maybe I will. So as I mentioned, we had very specific, recommendations that came out of that work, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them in just a second. One of the biggest recommendations, as soon as we walked in the door at the National Federation of the Blind program, the students immediately asked, what's on the inside? They could access the external information of the CASE 3D model and some of the other models that we had brought with us, but not the inside. And it was such an obvious light bulb moment for me, because like, of course, that's what you're going to want to do. So we learned how to slice our models in half, apply magnets so that they can be put back together easily, so that access to internal and external structures would be relatively straightforward for users, no matter who they were. And so here is our list of the best practices that we were able to glean from our user studies. Size is really important. A larger size essentially allows for better detail, to be able to have that tactile experience. So that 6 to 8 inch size of a 3D print is really the best. In the absence of that size, the smaller sizes work too, but being able to explore all of that detail at the larger size just made for a much more in-depth experience for the user. Resolution was really important too, which we had expected, but it was definitely useful to have that confirmed. Smoother, higher quality printing was much better because it really improved that overall information processing, or the mental map that students who are blind or visually impaired were making of the material as they went through that model. Quality was really important. Again, not necessarily a surprise, but useful to see it confirmed in the studies as well. Really, the stronger you can make them, the better. Reinforcing those joints and any of those connection points was really important. Jets are always difficult, but other weakness areas as well, as strong as you can make them for handling, the better. And as I mentioned earlier, access was really useful too. So being able to cut whole models in half and reattach them was really useful. Overall, I think there was some disappointment in the quantity. We had done the initial user testing study with, I think, 4 or 5 models. And while they were beloved, it was not enough. They really wanted access to more. They wanted more content, more of these models. So overall, it was just a wonderful kind of assessment that that universal design really did help. And of course, what we found ever since, sorry, excuse my cat, is that additional users were able to benefit from that work as well. So we do have a paper on that topic. If anybody is doing any 3D printing of their own, please feel free to check that out. So this is just a quick picture of what one of our kits look like. We have a couple different kits, kind of like a small and a large version of different objects that we've had some success with over time. All of them have been user tested. The next just shows a really quick glimpse of one of our pilot programs. This is with the International Astronomical Union's program called Inspiring Stars, where they showcased it at one of their events in Vienna and a few of their other events around the world, one in Brazil, and I forget where the third one was. And it was, again, just really useful to be able to get feedback on these 3D printed models. We also served up these kits with additional posters, small posters of tactile and braille information, and provided audio descriptions of the details of each of those models as well for people who didn't or weren't able to access the braille. So it's not the easiest to create these 3D models, but over time, what we found a lot of success with would be the models where it's a combination of that simulation data that's been constrained by the X-ray data. That's where I seem to find that there tend to be more models. And if any of you tends to work on this type of 3D modeling or simulation work, and you have stuff that you think might be useful, please do get in touch, because as I mentioned, the student groups that we've worked with so far have been very, very highly appreciative of the work and the effort that's gone into this project, and have really had additional beneficial things to give us in return to be able to make these experiences all the better. So if you're interested in finding out which objects we've been working on, please do see the websites that I've listed on the lower left corner of this page. There are quite a few other types of 3D models in the NASA 3D library as well. I believe all of the Chandra models are in that NASA 3D library now, but there's quite a few other really interesting ones as well. So feel free to explore that. I think, however, it was this idea that, oh, I see in the chat. Hold on, let me see if there's any questions. Oh, Ritu's putting in the URLs.
That was
Thanks,
just me
Ritu.
putting in the
Yeah,
link
yeah. Oh,
going.
that's great. It's
Here.
nice to even hear your voice for a second. Thank you. So yeah, as I was saying, that first project of that 3D model into 3D print was just kind of the first step. And I think it was really, really exciting to be able to take a project into fruition with a group of people that could make it so much better with the students at the National Federation of the Blind and elsewhere. But around the same time that we were working on this model, and I see Megan asks, are there any kits that CXC or CFA staff can check out, or do we only send them directly to BVI students? That is an excellent question, Megan. Also, the Space Cat wins the day. I agree. So we do actually have a couple kits Well, we did have kits at the CFA before the pandemic. I'm assuming they're still there. And yes, you could quote check one out. That I think is a great idea to spread the word of anyone who uses them. We've sent a few kits down to the Marshall Space Flight Center, so they have some that they loan out to local groups down near them. We have sent additional copies to like the Perkins School for the Blind, for example, Michigan State, not the university, but just the state of Michigan. Their Department of Education has some. Lighthouse organization out in California has some. So yes, if you are interested in doing some work with groups with these prints, please do get in touch. So yes, that's a great question. But let's see, where was I going? Oh yeah, virtual reality. So around the same time that we started working on the 3D prints, I think we just started wondering, what else could we do with this data? Because it was just so new and unique, and it had a lot of opportunity, I think, to try new things. And Casse, for me, is kind of like this perfect poster child of a great data set that we can do a whole lot with. So we started working with some students at Brown University. I have a little group down there that's in a lab, in a virtual reality lab, that has been working to do translation of the 3D models into VR space. And in this video, you can see one of the students is interacting with that model. This was incredibly exciting too, because it was just very different the first time I ever walked inside Cassiopeia A. I don't know. It was a data set that I kind of felt like I knew inside and out for so long. I've been staring at that, that information. And so to be able to walk inside of it was just really special. And I think there's a lot of potential here. But virtual reality has just sort of been one additional step, bringing into augmented reality as well. This is the Microsoft HoloLens version of mixed reality, technically. And in this version, we can use the HoloLens to be able to build up those layers of Casse, the silicon, the calcium, the iron, etc. So from the comfort of your home or your office, wherever you might be, you'll see in the video in a second as the person who's doing the demonstration starts to build up all of that information. And again, that was kind of like another step. How do you take a version and make it portable so that other people can access that data if they don't have their very own VR lab at their local university? And that was really exciting too. We also experimented with holograms, screen-based holograms. We've been doing this for the last couple of years, though during the pandemic, maybe quite a few people haven't seen them. But we have done some work with some small screen-based holograms to be able to bring them into public spaces, for example, before the pandemic started. And again, I think it's just an interesting example of all of the different formats this data can take. But, then the pandemic happened and lots of things changed. Our work with communities of students who are blind or low vision had to change. We could no longer be in a room with them or have multiple people touching the same object. And so that really kind of slowed things down for a while. And I think we all had to go back to the drawing board and think, well, how can we interact with this community who we have put a lot of time in to creating these networks that we now work with. And they have given us a lot of time back as to how to improve these models and make more of them. And that led to the project that we call data sonification. About a year and a little bit ago, I had been doing some work on spatial data sonification with the students at Brown University for a little bit, about a year before the pandemic started. And we were taking those virtual models and attaching sound to them. But then the pandemic hit and students had to go home and it just felt like everything stopped. So I had made some friends with a couple colleagues that created the System Sounds project, Matt Russo and Andrew Santaguida. And Matt and I had attended a data visualization conference together. And I was really a big fan of the work he was already doing and thought that we could take that technique and apply it to Chandra data. And so last year, we released the first set of data sonifications that translates that simple 2D information into sound. And instead of doing it by an auto script or a piece of software, we did kind of like bespoke creations, because the idea was that, some of these gender data sets were just so visually arresting and so visually complex that a very simple sound swipe across the data would not necessarily do the data or that sciencey goodness any justice. And so these bespoke creations, which were created in Python and Logic Pro, were meant to kind of bridge that gap of the science story with keeping the sort of overall aesthetic of the visual, but turning it into sound. So hopefully you'll be able to hear this. Here is the data sonification of Casse. In this version, it's essentially taking 4 different angles and radiating it outwards. And by chemical emission, each sound is essentially a different pitch. So the iron has a slightly higher pitch than the silicon, etc. And every layer of this sound is available individually. So you can hear just the iron, just the silicon, etc. And you can hear only one angle at a time if you like to. But in the interest of time, I thought I would just play all of them together. And here we go. Hopefully you can hear this. So that was one of our earlier pieces, and definitely one of the more complex, audio wise, as far as all of the sound to listen to. But again, we were not just creating this on our own in a bubble. We were really hoping to be able to work with communities of people who are blind or low vision to get their input to make sure this made sense, to make sure the sounds worked, that they could make the meaning out of them that we were hoping to, that they could enjoy it, that they could appreciate it, and that preliminary user testing went very well. We tested primarily at first with people more on the expert scale, an astrophysicist who is also blind in Japan, as well as an amateur astronomer who is blind, and she's in Canada. And then we also did deeper testing with students who were either blind or low vision from the Lighthouse organization in California, and got a lot of really helpful feedback on these first iterations, this first album, if you will, of the Chandra'S sonification. So we felt pretty comfortable putting these out. And um, I will be honest, I didn't really know what to expect for a response, but the response was really positive. However, I think before I get to that, I'm going to just talk a little bit more about some of the background. The sonification work, essentially that idea of sonification is just translating information to sound. And it's been used in quite a number of different fields, from biology and other kinds of medical imaging to now astronomy, of course, and other things like economics and lots of other different kinds of data visualization. It's definitely a growing area of research. I had already done some reading on Dr. Wanda Diaz's work in sonification. Gary Foran, who is the astrophysicist I mentioned, who did some of the preliminary testing for us. He's also doing some really great work in this. And there's quite a number of other people that are already actively researching this kind of information. And there's even a whole group of people that get together every month, the World Sonification Chat that I'm a part of, and talk through some of the issues around data sonification. But this project really was meant to be a rapid response project. So the idea of taking advantage of that sort of slower, quieter time in the earlier days of the pandemic to figure out how we could process data in this new way. And I'm going to play a few more examples so you get an idea of the breadth of techniques. There really was no one size fits all for these different data sets. Some very early work I had done on data sonification of a few different Chandra images just used a basic software application to like sweep across the data. And while the results were perhaps straightforward, they also did not have a lot of depth to them. And knowing this data as well as I do, it just really was not at all satisfying. So this more sort of creative approach to soundscapes, where we're taking the data, we're taking that spectrogram and actually translating that into the sound made sense, and being able to then process it in the Logic Pro software to make sure the sound engineering was also really high quality was important. So I'm going to play for you now a radial scan of M51. This is another piece that is pretty complicated, because I was very interested in seeing how a sonification would work when we had many different layers like we do for the Whirlpool Galaxy. And so you're going to hear all of the different sounds playing in this one, where we're going to start with the X-ray, which is the highest sound, and then we're going to sweep down through the ultraviolet, the optical, and the infrared. And in this case, we've got the loudness of it. It's determined by the brightness of the data in the image, and the pitches are determined by the distance from the center as well. So light farther from the center is heard as these higher pitch notes from the scale. And as I mentioned, each wavelength is mapped to a very limited range of pitches. We chose a melodic minor scale for this one, just because, again, with all the complexity, it seemed to make the most sense. Some of this really is trial and error, but I rely very heavily on Matt and Andrew to do some of that preliminary legwork, because they are already experts in music and sound engineering. And that is very, very useful to have on this team for sure. We have, for the types of sounds, a choir sound that we use for the smoother features, and a combination of harp and piano that are used for the smaller compact sources. So here we go. Let's listen to the Chandra data of Whirlpool Galaxy. And the ultraviolet. And Hubble optical. And the infrared. And the symphony of them all combined. And I think I'll play maybe one more example. I put a lot of examples in here, but I don't have time for all of them. However, I'll put the website in, or probably Ruchi will put the website in on where you can listen to all of them. We did in one of the more recent batches, we did the Chandra Deep Field because I really was interested in exploring a more visually simple image that had a very arresting scientific story behind it. And I'm actually really pleased with how this came up. This is a scan from the bottom to the top. And the color in the image is mapped to the musical pitches. So we've got from red um, through violets are mapped from the low to the high pitches. And the color represents X-ray energy or frequency. So those lower notes are the lower energy X-rays and the higher notes, the higher energy X-rays. And I don't know if there are any fans of Imogen Heap on here. She's actually a favorite artist of mine. And for some reason, this piece just very strongly makes me think of her work, which I would hope is a compliment, but I don't know if she would take it like such. So here is Deep Field, which is probably my favorite ever. I would love to see a thumbs up or two if you all think that is as lovely as I do. But and I'll just say that we have, oh, thanks, you too. You're my favorite. Thanks, Peter. We have quite a few more. I'll play some snippets of maybe one or two more, but what we have found is that each data set is so unique that there has just not been a very single or simple approach that we've been able to narrow down for many of them. The pillars of creation, for example, we really wanted to make sure we didn't lose the texture of those, columns of gas and dust in the middle, while making sure the Chandra components of those stars, those young stars, was also really clear. And so we experimented a little bit to be able to do some work on that one. Again, very different sounding. My cat is messing with my headphones. And I see Peppy asked the most perfect question because she asked if I've looked at the Galactic Center. And yes, indeed, we have. The Galactic Center was also one of the very first ones we did. And until we did the Deep Field, was my favorite at the time. And I've used this with a lot of talks with younger learners, just because I feel like it's actually pretty approachable and I can break it down into constituent parts and it sounds very symphony-esque, and has had a very, very positive response to it. So I'm going to play a snippet of this one. And similarly with this one, it is a left to right pan, but in this case, the lowest energy, the infrared data is essentially a very soft piano. The mid-ranges of from Hubble are kind of like a plucky violin, and Chandra comes in at the highest sound with like a sort of xylophone or bell, tinkling bell kind of sound. And what I really enjoy about this piece is that, there's so much activity in this downtown region of the Galactic Center, of course, but as you approach that area around Sagittarius A star, you really do hear like a little mini crescendo. And I feel like that's been pretty impactful for our listeners to be able to experience. So here you go. This is my last audio demo, I promise, and then I'll move on. had quite a few people ask to inquire if that could be used in like sleep and meditation apps, which I will take as a compliment. But yeah, I've been very pleased with the results of some of these. And we've done other objects as well. I won't really go through them, but from Crab Nebula and Supernova 1987A, to others as well. We just most recently released M87, and a couple others 2 weeks ago, I think, or maybe it was 3 weeks ago. So what have been the results of some of this project? I I have mentioned this to a few people, and I feel like people are always surprised when I say this, but I really did not expect this to have the impact that it did. I thought it would be useful for our sort of smaller, closer knit communities. But quite the opposite happened. It went viral. There was like over 1.5 million listens on NASA's SoundCloud within the first like week and a half. Significant news coverage, really incredible to see that. Very high levels of engagement on our social media and digital platforms, like such as YouTube. Hundreds and thousands of views or listens, if you will, across our videos on social media and also YouTube platforms. It was our most popular feature on the Chandra website in 2020, and for most or much, I guess I should say, of 2021, the sonifications have been consistently in the top 10 pages, even if like another news story has perhaps kicked them out of the #1 spot. I was very, very surprised with those results. The web statistics and analytics that we had that showed the people coming in to listen to them and to look at them were just much higher than I expected. And it really, I guess, helped show that this resonated with people. Ooh, bad pun. But definitely helped resonate with people in a much more broad way than I had expected. And of course, it was exciting. But then after a release or two, I really did wonder, what did it mean? And could we sort of do any further analysis of how people were responding to this in a little bit more detail? So we did conduct a research study on that perception and response of the sonifications. This was across expert and non-expert spectrum and across the BVI and non-BVI spectrum. So kind of like a 2x2 grid setup. We had over 4,500 responses. It was almost about 5,000 responses. And we had to clean out some of the data. So about 4,500 responses that we ended up being able to work with. And one of the most fun responses in our comment section was that it was the most fun survey I ever took, which I was so excited about at first. But then I was like, well, considering the other surveys might be like your grocery store or something like that, maybe I shouldn't get too excited. But overall, the Galactic Center, Cassidy A, Deep Field were the items that we had chosen for the research study. The learning levels in general were equal for both groups on the BVI and non-BVI groups. Enjoyment levels was both high for the groups, but it was statistically slightly higher for BVI groups, blind or visually impaired groups. And what was a nice surprise was also that learning about access for others had a statistical significance for the non-BVI group, so that people who came to this project, perhaps not knowing that much about how other people gathered data of the world around them, somehow learned about how other people can access information of the universe if they are either blind or low vision. So overall, it was a really positive response, and I'm still working on the paper. If anyone wants to help write said paper, hit me up after this. I would be very much appreciated. So you can see just a few groups, a few data points that I grabbed here. In the open comment section, we asked people to put in a few terms that resonated with them when they listened to these pieces. And overall, they were very emotionally sort of intensified terms that were being used. So happy, peaceful, beautiful, relaxed, amazed, interesting. We had quite a few people talking about the emotional response to the data in the open comments section as well, which was another really interesting thing to be able to read. And I don't have a lot of data to compare with emotional response necessarily of images, but it was very interesting to see that pulled out so very specifically in this case. So since then, we've done a few more sets of the sonifications. Headquarters is really happy with them, so they've asked for them to be done as releases, and we put them on our social media. In the new albums, if you will, tend to do well. So it's been, again, just really exciting to see the response to it overall. We've done some additional work since then on creating a very simple sonification and haptification app that the students are working at down at the Brown University lab right now. Which essentially involves being able to upload any Chandra or other astronomical data set to our app function so that they can do a very simple swipe across the data set to be able to do a very basic sonification on demand, and also to get the haptic response, that vibrational response from your phone, for example. So if you use this app on a smartphone, you not only get the sound as you're going through the data, but you can also get the vibrational information from your phone. So that is a work in progress as well. And now that students are back, we're also starting to work again on figuring out how to attach that sonification data to the spatial information so that in a virtual reality experience, for example, you can toggle on or off if you want visual, haptic, or sonification data, depending on your preference or what thing that you have the abilities to be able to access. So that is in progress as well. But I think I've been talking longer than I expected, so I'll be really fast on this last project. But again, during the pandemic, it just became clear that there was still a missing piece of access to this information. And so we started yet another project called the Visual Descriptions Program that essentially helps our users connect to the Chandra data in yet another way, being able to get a very thorough and deep explanation of what the images on our website are providing when we release them. And so this is done in real time, where we have the visual descriptions that are provided in a text format and audio format. We then take that information and recycle it as alternative text and metadata for our image files and for our web and social media platforms. We also take the audio recordings and concatenate them into a podcast feed that was by user request, essentially. So you can follow some of the links there to learn more about what we're doing. But this is just an example of the Cat's Eye Nebula sonification. We also do them for plain images and illustrations too, but I thought this would be appropriate to keep with a theme, where you can see we're actually describing what the Cat's Eye Nebula looks like. The shape is the Cat's Eye Nebula, a huge cloud of gas and dust blown off of a dying star. The concentric circles are bubbles expelled by the star over time. The dust cloud resembles a translucent pastry pulled to golden yellow points near our upper right and lower left, with a blob of bright purple jelly inside the bulbous pale blue core. So the point of this is to get a very descriptive bit of information to our users, particularly those who are blind or low vision, to be able to have a fuller mental picture of what it is the images or the videos or the illustrations are presenting on the scientific story. And to do that, we've kind of gone through quite a few iterations on figuring out some best practices, and kind of had to refine how we did that. But essentially, we had two issues that were clear pretty quickly, that we couldn't just do one or the other. We couldn't just describe the science and just describe the image. It really had to be an integrated approach, which sounds obvious, but again, was really useful to be able to figure out. And that is backed up from a few years of research we had done in other research projects predating this project as well for Chandra. But also style is really important. And so particularly for the non-expert part of that spectrum, these data are really rich data. There's a lot going on. The story can be challenging to figure out. So to be able to paint a picture of it for a mental map, we really had to focus on creating short sentences, using numerous commas, make sure we always pulled out those proper nouns. Instead of saying it, use the cosmic object name, or instead of saying it to referring to Chandra, refer to Chandra by name. What that also helped do was help actually the output of screen readers, because commas, for example, provide you just a fraction of a second of a pause. And so as you're absorbing all of this information through your ears, that microsecond of a pause really just gives you a little bit of time to digest before you move on. So those are some of the tips and tricks that we've found out by doing this project. I won't go into the other examples because there's a lot of them, but we have been very fortunate that this new material has actually helped us elsewhere as well. By using these techniques, it's actually helped improve our search engine optimization, which is not something we had thought of before, but yes, makes total sense now. And it's just this whole idea that when we're designing for the universe, that availability of data does not equal accessibility and equity of data. That's something we're really trying to take to heart. And I guess I would just probably close with two things. One, I'll show you my collaborator slide next, but my very good friend Christine Malik, who is a collaborator on a couple of these projects, she is the amateur astronomer in Canada that I mentioned, sort of liken these projects, the sonification one and the visual description project one, in a way, to the idea of food, which is great because it's lunchtime. But for her, these sonifications, these visual descriptions, they are the main meal. And it's got that really heavy duty nutritional value for her. For somebody who's sighted, it might only be the dessert. Now, it's perfectly lovely to eat dessert, but perhaps it doesn't have the nutritional bang or buck, right? However, it's still, who doesn't love dessert? But for somebody who is blind, or especially blind since birth, having an inroad into this amazing universe that we all live in has been really important to her. So I just like to recognize her comments because I thought they were just really eloquently said. So these are all of the teams that have been working on these projects with us. It's just truly a big group effort. I'm just very proud of all of the work that we've been able to do so far. And yeah, just hope to keep learning and keep trying new things. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Ritu, I hope I didn't go too long. I don't remember how long you wanted for questions, but once I get going, I just can't stop, I guess.
No, you're fine. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
I'd heard some of these before and I still really enjoyed hearing them again. And I heard some that I hadn't. So that was really beautiful. Question.
Sorry, forgot I had sound on that piece.
As questions as we are serenaded by Cassie in the background.
Exactly.
I have a lot of claps. As a reminder, if you have questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. While we are waiting, I wanted to ask actually, what's coming up?
Isn't that enough? New sonifications, and then finishing up a few of the different pieces of software that we've been working on. We have some like tutorials and activities so people can try doing data sonification on their own as well, that I'm excited for. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I love this part of my job. It's a little more fun than like reporting and emails and stuff. So I can, imagine it's definitely good stuff. So hopefully I didn't put everybody else to sleep. I don't see other questions. Oh, wait, there's a question. Are there any plans maybe to have live music? Oh, so thank you, Crystal. This is a great question. And well, I'm not sure if this is the way you meant, but we do have some friends at the New Bedford Symphony Orchestra who are in the process of translating the Galactic Center sonification into sheet music so that it could be played by live musicians. And I am very, very excited about that. I am a music lover, but not a active musician myself. So if there, is the chance to hear the Galactic Center played live on a symphony stage, I think I would be in heaven. So, and that's my dog.
Thank you. And we actually have another question in the chat from Peppy. Are you going commercial, SI Enterprise perhaps?
I don't think so. I don't know what I would do there. But all of these materials are released into the public domain. And we have definitely gotten queries for people that want to put them into their meditation app, I think was one of the cool ones, or a sleep app. I forget which one asked, but that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm very interested to see where else this grows. This was a pandemic project that I don't feel will, die with the pandemic, assuming the pandemic ever does die. I just think it can only grow. And I'm not really sure where it will go. But if people have ideas, please do let me know, right? Like a lot of this is just, like a curiosity fest, right? Like it's just kind of like, will this work? I mean, we have some obviously research going into it, but it's always just, there's always room for improvement. There's always room to learn more. So I see Pat has his hand up. I don't know if anyone else does, but
I think it's just Pat at this moment.
cool.
Uh,
That's my dog Juno, always on cue.
yeah, my dog Corey looked up at that one. So I just was curious, and I can't remember if I've asked you this before, but when you do a say a horizontal scan across a rectangular image, and like the galactic center one, the sonification is can be degenerate with different combinations of the image. You could make that same sound by rearranging some of the image top to bottom, for example. If you also scan top to bottom and put it in the others and put it in stereo headphones, you would separate those two. And I'm just curious as to whether you ever thought of that.
So we actually have been trying a few things. Like we did use stereo for the deep field, and that was really nice to be able to do that one as well. And with the Galactic Center, I didn't mention this project earlier, but we worked with the Kennedy Space Center recently to be able to create broadcast friendly versions of these sonifications, mostly in stereo. And some of them used a slightly different configuration of the data for like that reason. We were going for essentially what they wanted was something very specific for their audience. And it's really great because they're actually going to be playing them with their live launch broadcasts throughout the fall semester and into the spring. So millions of new people will be able to access them, but I can play a little clip of it. Actually, can I? Because it's not in PowerPoint, or maybe I can. If I play this, can you hear it? Can you hear that?
No.
No, but I think if you share the window that it's on with the audio sharing.
Okay. Let me try that. So one of the things that we have been asked for by a bunch of users is to slow down the sonification. So we are working on an application where people can actually adjust their own speed and then create the sonification themselves with simpler sounds, but still hopefully pleasing sounds. So here is a quick snippet of the Galactic Center that's been slowed down. In stereo. But what's interesting is the slower version was specifically requested from users who are blind or low vision as a way to be able to process the data better. And then we also have, I think it's not in this version, but it's elsewhere on my laptop. We also have a version that does scan out through stereo. So we've been trying different cuts of these things to see what makes the most sense. And our user feedback on that has been really, really helpful to be able to figure out what to try next. So again, like as I mentioned, if you have other ideas on how to improve that, please do let us know. Because yeah, I'm not a sound person. So this is like a whole new field that I've been crashing on for the past year and a half, 2 years, and I'm still a newbie, lots to learn. So there's any musicians here, like, and I know there are, you might have particular insights as well. And I'd appreciate that. I haven't played an instrument since like I played the flute in like 6th grade or 7th grade. So clearly it's been a long time for me music wise. So I did sing for a long time after that. But again, I would really love some feedback and some input. And if you have other ideas of specific data sets that you'd like to try because they have a specific merit that would really lend itself to sound, I'd be interested in hearing that too. So I feel like I've gone way over and I know we're starting to lose people. So I'm sorry I chatted so much or two. Hopefully that's okay.
Fine. This is questions. We can, if you're free, we can keep going.
Yeah, I could do a few more minutes before my stomach growls too loud.
Yes, food is necessary.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
maybe the Galactic Center soothed you all to sleep, which I would not be offended if that happened. So I hope you did find this useful to hear some of these projects and learn a little more about them. But it was fun talking with you all and seeing some familiar faces or names.
Yeah, it was great hearing this. I have to say, I hadn't heard the slowed down Galactic Center, and while Galactic Center, I think so far had been my favorite, but I think the slowed down version has topped that. So
yeah, it's really, really cool. And I'm so happy with that suggestion. Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense to have control over the playback speed too. So being able to sort of automate that in a way is one of our goals for the next few months. So
very cool. So I don't see any other questions. I'm guessing people have decided to let you go eat lunch.
awesome. Did I drop too many hints? I didn't mean to, but yeah.
Thank you again. This was
Thanks.
wonderful. Thanks everybody for joining us, and hope to see you next week.
Thanks,
Oh,
Jeff.
and